going to be talking about production planning. Now, we'll look at how you can be planning for your own scenes at home, and then we're going to also be looking at how you can expect to be planning in larger productions, and how I assume, because I haven't been in very large scale, the other way around. I haven't been in very many studios where what's up, Michael? How you doing, man? Kinsey in the house. Where the production team is quite small, but I can make some assumptions about how that would scale down, and most likely what people would be working with when it comes to it. Solar, how you doing? Hello. Oh, I just realized I'm playing my own stream in the background. That's not weird. You'll be the organizer of your course team project. You are all ears. Nice. Kieran, what's up, dude? Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. So maybe we should open Unreal as well, so you can look at like what's going on there. Let's see here. But yeah, there's a lot of like planning that you can spiral into, and you can overplan for sure. Array, what's going on? This will actually you'll see a lot of here's Array's scene. She's currently going through a mentorship. You'll probably hear some common tones. What's up, Clancy? How you doing? Good to see you, man. I think I actually saved over the corner wall piece, so I think it's still gold. yeah, it is. That's funny. So let's start by looking at this scene, right? If we can press F11 on here so we can get a bigger picture. So this scene obviously is I would say is semi-complex, but the reality is there's not actually very many assets in here, and I've talked about that before on the stream as well. What's up, Rookie? Miro, how you doing? So a lot of this comes to like, how can you plan to build a scene in a way where you're not having to essentially overcomplicate what you're trying to make, right? Because it's quite easy to do that. And I mean, I know a lot of when you're learning how to make a scene or learning how to make environments, that there's so many things you're going to want to try and figure out how to do, that you either assume the entire industry uses all the time, or that you actually have to know all of the ways. And I mean, the reality is often we mix up the whole idea of is this a learning experience, or is this I'm just trying to build a scene type of situation, right? So you have to be able to distinguish those two things apart. And I think I talked about that in one of the other pre-shows, about knowing when you're learning and knowing when you're just trying to execute. And a lot of the times that's why people that once you enter the games industry, you run into this moment where essentially you feel like you've plateaued, like you're not learning anything anymore. And that's because you've absorbed everything that the current team has taught you, and you're now just executing and creating content for whatever game you're working on. And that's when that itch starts the itch that you need to scratch, and then you start working on personal art again at home. So understanding what you're building and keeping it kind of in a production plan is really important. And I think next week as well, I'll be talking about scope and what it means for feature creep and content bloat and all those like weird terms that no one talks about. Hey, Rouge, how you doing? So how I ended up making this scene essentially started with looking at a concept, right? Maybe we can pull that up as well. Good old Tim. The Tim scene, if you will. If you don't know who Tim is, check him out. Great artist. Yeah, environment artists everywhere. 360 no scope every day. Full real time, fully destructible. You don't have to worry about that. So this is the shot, and you can tell I already kind of expanded a little beyond what is in the concept. But we go through and I kind of break it down into parts, and I also overexpose sometimes when an image is kind of dark, just to make sure I'm seeing all the little elements and understanding what's happening in it. And then it's a matter of locating an angle. And for anyone who doesn't know what this is pure ref, this little tool I'm using here. It's either this one or Miro that I'm using for image gathering or displaying. So we've got that here. And then we kind of frame up to something close to it. Of course, mine is not nearly as crunchy. Yeah, feel free to link that, Muck. Vertex building. I want to build an entire village, and every building is interable. Yeah, the struggle, man. See, and that's where it's like, okay, build a team, you and another artist, right? And maybe one artist is doing the interiors and the other artist is doing the exteriors. And then there's some other issues that you're going to have to work through and solve, or like production problems you're going to have to figure out how you guys will do that. But that makes it more approachable, right? Yeah, I'll work more on the lighting on this scene, but for the time being, we're just going to be looking at how you get to this point when you're planning your production or planning your scene, right? First, we'll look at this, and then I'll talk about the scope of games in general. So looking at this concept, we go through, we identify primary elements. We try to keep the number down to 2 to 3 props per like unique element. When I say unique element, like these guys, I would say you probably don't need more than 3 of these. And I think I did that. There might be a few more. And then for the ground, there's these bigger ones, and I think I only have 2 or 3 of those. The ivy is 3, I think. Let me see here. Yeah, it's just three parts. But when you're planning your scene, a lot of people are like, okay, how do I block this out? And in Unreal, you now have some modeling tools. Kieran says, I feel like scope isn't always an obvious problem. Sometimes I find myself choosing concepts after a while and slowly realizing the scope is way too unrealistic. I need to get better at noticing that earlier. Dude, that takes lots of practice, man. And you see it happen in games as well. And you have to dial back, and that's where a lot of in production you'll hear the idea of cutting content, right? And the player base looks at that as like a cheap move, but the reality is without cutting content, you're not going to get the game. You're not going to get the game at all. We're trying to make it, So let's go into we're going to reverse engineer this in this Blender scene here. I'm just going to move this concept out of the way so we can just focus on this. Hey Melissa, how you doing? I am doing great. So we've got our prop pieces, right? I've got my grass, my little plants, and we've got the well, this centerpiece thing here, and a ground piece, a set of stairs, a corner for the set. And it's like knowing how to set these all up, right? If I go to the top view, it starts to become super clear. Like let's make a cube really fast here, and look at that. Like this cube is literally the same size, and I arbitrarily find a height that I feel like works for what I'm trying to do. But from a modular sense, like this really helps, because then I can just focus on the grid and Like if I snap these to the grid, right, they'll just work. They'll just connect together. The other thing is I don't know if I maintained it, but let's see. So if I scale this down, you can see I'm at the top left there. We've got a scale of 0.31. So let's go 0.3. And it almost looks like it's fitting. That's interesting. Let's see. Let's go 0.25. Yeah, so it looks like I kind of scaled it up. So usually I'll cut sizes down, right? So this is a fourth of the size of this. But of course, this is still a cube. And we're just eyeballing this, of course, for the demonstration. But the reality is I'm keeping very, very simple, and I'm just trying to get the details that I need. I've essentially taken the concept, broken it up into pieces, and am figuring out all the parts that I'm going to need. Now, oh, that's not what I want. Hang on here. Got some notes here on the side. So some stuff to keep in mind is when you decide to make a scene, you're like, okay, I want to make something, right? I want to make a scene. You find the concept. We just looked at the concept. You want to understand what your goal is. Like, what do you want to achieve with this piece? You want to learn something, or is it to build for your portfolio? And that's the thing where I was talking about, where it's either you're trying to produce content or you're trying to learn something. And by produce content, I think if you're working from home or you're at school, you're just trying to build on your portfolio. That's producing personal content, right? The learning aspect is where you're trying to do something you haven't done before, or is outside of your comfort zone. So if you're not used to, for me, for example, this scene, I'm not used to stylized textures or hand painted textures. So this is a perfect excuse for me to use a concept that has relatively simple shapes that I can easily kind of break down into modular pieces and then turn into something that I can then practice and learn how to do more stylized work. Right. So by making everything else easier on me, I can then really focus on the learning aspect that I want to focus on. So if you can go down that checklist, you're like, all right, I got a concept that I'm interested in, and it checks off what I want as far as the goals go. Then you're good to go. Now it's like, okay, how do I build this? So for me, we broke all of these pieces up. When I say we, I mean me. I don't know why I do that all the time. Hello, Joe. How you doing? Kaz, yes, you are right about the hold control to use a magnet to snap while scaling. It does depend on if it's incremental or if it's vertex and whatnot, but yeah, so there's some things that you won't do until you've done it like a bunch of times, like for example the stair set here, and knowing to make like a corner piece, and the fact that you should be able to just mirror that corner piece, knowing that the pivot, you could put the pivot in the same spot where you can center the pivot to the object itself. Either way, so we make all these pieces, right? And what people tend to not do often, which I highly suggest if you're building a scene, is to know your own prop count. It's kind of like a early guess. Yeah, I'm a hive mind. I'm actually a bunch of pieces of little creatures. Watching too much games. I'm not going to reference which game right now. So a lot of people don't build on the whole idea of like, okay, I want to build this scene, and then they just start blocking it all out and figuring out like, oh, where things need to be, and they're looking at the really big shapes, and that part's good. That's like the walls and figuring out where everything kind of is. But then they go into, and this isn't everyone, of course, but then they go into this, I'm going to take this prop and I'm going to make that. And then I'm going to put it in the environment. And then I'm going to take this prop and I'm going to make that and then put it in the environment. I highly suggest that you block out every asset and then actually try and build the scene with it. You will answer so many questions about how many assets you will need. You'll answer questions about assets that you didn't realize you would need. And then now you end up blocking those out as well and placing them in the scene. And then you immediately start to see very early how many assets you actually need to build, right? You can also do some asset cutting for yourself, which is essentially like you make the blockouts for all these pieces, you start building the scene, you think about reuse and trying to reuse the pieces that you're blocking out, and you're building up the scene and trying to get all the details exactly where you want them. I even block out the foliage and like all the plants and grass and stuff, and just get it in the scene. You get a really good sense for the whole space. And it, like I was saying, it answers tons of questions when it comes down to like, do I actually need that prop? How useful is that prop? And reusability will play a huge part if you try and reuse a prop a lot of the times just to replicate the same look. Like, for example, I talked about it in another stream, but all these props down here is being done with two meshes that are either rotated or flipped upside down and then rotated. You can get a lot of reuse from those. So now I don't have to make a bunch of these. I just need to make 2, right? And I would have assumed when I looked at this, I'm probably going to need 3 or 4 because there's some over here. But when you try and make this as well, you end up realizing, oh, okay, I only need to make 2. And remember this, you've actually placed them now. So not only are you placing all of these blockout pieces, which took almost no effort to create, right? Because they're just cubes. You create all these blockout pieces, you place them in the scene, you're literally propping the scene at that exact moment. I sound crazy because I'm stating quite obvious things. Or like literal things that you see in front of you as you're doing it. So it's weird to talk about it in this sense, but big brain. No, man, it's what it is, Miro. It's not big brain. It's years of failing. You try and fail less and less as you go, right? And you slowly become like aware of ways to cut corners to find composition faster, right? So imagine these are all block out and I've placed them everywhere. And even like the plants, that could just be extruded planes. And you're like, okay, I'll just extruded planes. And then you get a sense of the scale. You understand where they need to be placed. And then you're like, okay, despite the fact that there were no particles in the scene, where's the camera position at? So you can start framing stuff. You can answer so many questions. You could even do your lighting at this point, though I suggest to not do your lighting yet. You could, if you needed a breather, if the blockout was too much, or you're like, I need to just change gears for a minute, you could switch to a really basic lighting pass just to get your shadows in the right direction and whatnot. But yeah, so when I say block out, I mean everything. Block it all out, prop with it, build your shots. It's like that first propping pass. It'll help you understand if you have enough assets and how many assets you actually need. Maybe you need more, maybe you need less. Maybe you can cut some that you've already built. The next step I would say is a basic texture pass. Now, if I go to unlit here, you can see there's quite a bit of texturing going on, but the colors are there, right? We know the ground is going to be pretty green. The foliage is going to be pretty green. Maybe you want to separate the ivy from the ground foliage with like a slightly different green, or like a different value of that green. But when I'm doing that blockout, yes, it's all gray. I usually will make sure there's a directional light in there just so I'm seeing the shapes and forms. But you're just trying to match essentially the concept. Now this next phase is like base texture pass. And when I mean base, I mean you're not even opening Substance Designer. You're not bringing in textures at all. You're making a basic material that you can instance off of and just color pick and say what the roughness is and if it's metal or not. Block color, yes. So if it's metallic, if it's emissive, if it's gray or it's green or blue, those you can make a really simple shader and just start getting it on the assets, right? So you get all of those in, and that's essentially, you're at that point looking at your scene with kind of the colors all in place. Yes, Ben. So once all those colors are in place, that's when I would say you do that first real pass of lighting, trying to get the atmosphere to match what you're going for, and the shadow color and the direction of the lights and where the shadows are pointing, as well as cameras, right? And when you're placing cameras, it's a lot of like, you could start quite early. If you want to be really quick about it, you can just be like control 1 and then go over here, control 2, maybe you're like up here, control 3 over here. Like this is kind of interesting angle, control 4. So then I can do 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once you're happy with these, you can press 1, you're here, create a camera. So it's very quick. You can just be getting those angles out. Now, if you understand how to break your scene up pretty quickly, or if you understand how you want to break your scene up, you can be really quick about getting these blockouts created, right? Then you just get them into Unreal, place them all, start getting that composition all set, get your colors on there, and then place a light, get some cameras. You could probably, if you know what you're doing or you understand how to break it down, you could do this entire scene, block out, lighting pass, and composition in an evening, right? And you'll know at that point as well how many props you might need. Now, if you're blocking out some really complex things, like maybe you need to block out a bicycle, or maybe you need to block out a vehicle, that's where I would be like, okay, how much detail does that blockout need to be for you to understand that it's a vehicle? It could be a giant block, right? Or it could be like a block that's lifted and then some blocks for the wheels or cylinders for the wheels, just so you know where the wheels are at. If you need to rotate the wheels, you can do that, and that'll help you if you're trying to think of a lighting composition. And again, it's, you make a cube or a like a longer block, place it, that's your vehicle, and you're like, oh, okay. Now that I've got the lighting in this angle, I notice that the light hits the cube in this direction, which gives me the shadows, but I can see that where the wheels are at with them being straight, because you don't rotate them until you know what you want to do with the wheels, right? You literally can go, okay, now I'll rotate the wheels this way because I know where the light's at. Now you're catching the lighting on where that wheel will be later. It's like you're lighting the pieces that you haven't even made yet. So it's knowing that order is really beneficial. Brishan, how you doing? Ben in chat earlier was saying on his last scene he built, he blocked it all out. This is such a substance material artist mindset, man. Took each asset, did a sculpt, baked normals for them, and did the whole scene, had the normal maps before he even started texturing. So it's like you're just looking at normal information and the way the lighting affects that surface, right? You want classes? You got a job. Congratulations, man. Now, if you want to, when it gets to the phase where you're like, okay, now I want to start making stuff, right? You've got your colors, you've got your lighting direction, you've got your camera angles, which of course any of that stuff can change, right? Don't think that it's locked in and that you've committed to it, but you have a very clear direction almost immediately, right? In an evening or in a few evenings, you've got everything you need to know. Then it's like, okay, reference gather for the props that you know that you're going to make. So now you're not wasting time on the references that you need to gather. You know exactly like, okay, I blocked out this bicycle. I know I need to make this bicycle. I grab all these references for bicycles, put it in that section of my peer ref, and now all the references are gathered for that asset. And you just go down the line if you want to, or you can take a like another pass on the asset just to get it like a little bit further detailed, right? So after all of that, it's really about just executing on all of the props. Now, I would highly suggest on starting with the broad strokes, right? So we know the ground, at least in this scene, the ground is something that you're going to want to look at, or it takes up a lot of the screen, and the sky. So for me, I have not attached any like work to the sky currently, because it fulfills enough for me until much later, because I don't even know if the sky is going to be in view, at least for this scene. So looking at the ground needs material. So then I work on the ground, get it working the way I want it to work. And then it's the modular pieces. And you'll probably have noticed this in the stream as well, right? Is that it's the modular pieces first, and the ground is what I went for. And then it's like, okay, well, now what? What's the next biggest thing? It's probably the centerpiece. I didn't even hit the cube until much later, and I wouldn't even say it's done yet, but the cube I didn't even touch until recently. So that stayed an emissive solid mass for weeks, right? Because I only work on this really when I'm streaming. But yeah, at that point, it's just iteration on your content. Big to small, modular first, smaller, then less relevant, then less relevant. If you're getting tired or you're starting to feel like the scene looks done, maybe you don't even have to make some of the stuff. Like, really, these guys haven't even been touched yet. And I could probably do these ones and maybe the two here. and then it would be I could probably get away with not doing some of these props at that point, right? So that's the real production of like looking at it in its full spectrum early, and just planning for the entire production of it, right? So I'm gonna go into where are we at here? We're gonna go into this here really fast, and we're just going to kind of reiterate on these stages, right? So I'm just going to do this and then highlight these and click this guy. This is, for anyone who's wondering, this is Miro. I've been getting more and more obsessed with it as we go. So concept, oops, I'm just going to full caps here. Concept, blockout, prop, blockout, and then prop scene in engine, right? DevCon, what's up, man? Yes, I'll start the stream now that you're here. Lighting. Actually, no. Base colors. Simple base colors. Right? And then lighting. And then if you look at it, then it's like, okay, from here, you know exactly what you need to do. Needs more WYSB in there. Hey, Chris, how you doing, man? I hope your computer is okay. But when it comes to this type of production, when it's not just you, right? It's nice, Chris. A streaming computer. I should get that going. Production planning in a large scale environment, and maybe Chris will say something in chat that'll make me add some more stuff in here, because it's not going to be all encompassing, but I'm going to attempt to cover as much of it as possible. You have things like concept, like normal, right? But what are you building? Concept art is probably starting at the same time as art is. So concepts probably, how am I going to display this? So concept's going to start, as well as direction on how they want the game to look, right? There's a whole lot of other things happening in the background, like narrative is figuring out stuff. But when it comes to the art can't really do anything. So there's a lot of R&D, right? Research and development, figuring out how you want to build things. You're going to be working really closely with tech art, especially, and you'll be working on R&D for who knows how long, until maybe it's time to start building in the levels that have been dictated. When does art direction come in? So art direction hopefully is in this. Concept is being guided by art direction. We'll just say AD, art direction, art director. That should all be happening quite early on, right? And I don't know if this is going to display well. I'm trying to figure out how I visualize this. But so you're doing R&D. Concept and art direction are just trying to solve everything visual, hopefully logically as well, with narrative. And art, we'll just say art, R&D, we'll just be doing research and development on how they want to build things, possibly with TA or tech art. Actually, I'll just write that out so it's very clear. Possibly and hopefully, I would say, with tech art. The same thing is happening with level design, doing R&D, gameplay tests, trying to like, what are some cool things we could do? And a lot of that will be dictated by the narrative as well as art direction and concept. So Chris says this is when it matters a lot if your art director is game focused, like concept focused, or like concept focused. Pros and cons with each. Concept might be more free creatively, while a game focused art director will make the art direction that will actually work for the game in production. Yeah, so when it's more free and open, it can become, I wouldn't say more difficult, but require more of your brain to extrapolate what's in the concept to turn into the environment, right? Whereas like an art director, gameplay focused, is going to be showing you, yeah, I can do that, Paul. I might clean it up a little bit more so it's clear, but I can share this. But yeah, so level design and art are doing R&D. The level design is probably also going to be working with tech art in order to hopefully get tools if there's tools that they need that they currently do not have. Same with art, requesting tools or designing pipelines for how they want to create content. And I mean, it doesn't sound very fun, but document all of this, right? You need to document all of this content, because how you build things, how it looks, how tech art wants it to work, how level design works, this portion's super important. If this isn't documented, and then let's say I hire Paul joins the team, and then I'm like, yeah, you just got to build it like us. If he has no documentation to go off of, it's like, okay, what am I like, how do I build things, right? And the ideas, concept and art direction and narrative are also building documentation, so that way you have this what I'm describing as an onboarding experience. That onboarding experience is very, very important. And this is a little bit of a side tangent, but the onboarding experience being solid will literally add years to the person being at the studio. So the onboarding experience quite literally equals retention increase. Very, very important. Anywho, art, let's say that LD are now at a phase where they can start blocking out maps. So they're building scenes, right? Now, when they're building scenes, level art or environment art can help with this. What's up, Snake Eyes? Can help with this and assist with like looking at composition and stuff. I would say a really good level designer will have strong composition and lead the eye and be looking, and it'll help the artist be able to not have to like fudge around with it as much. But at the core, I would say a level designer's job is to nail the blockout experience. Like I should know that I'm in this like we look at Last of Us, I should know that I'm in these city streets and I'm going between buildings and this building's bombed out, and I should be able to see in the blockout that is indeed a collapsed ceiling, right? But a lot of that stuff is handled by level design. Now, while that's all happening, art can be looking at it. They're still doing a lot of documentation. And I would say at some point, there's going to be blockout iteration with level art, where you're going back and forth. You're trying to get a specific look to work, right? That works for both teams. I'm gonna just do this so we can see how things are separating. And at some point, you will then diverge into a state where you start to try and replace with more either prop blockout. Like this is when you would hit this phase, right? So if we bring this down here, prop blockout and propping scene in engine, it is very important. This is my personal view on this, that you retain in some way, or like in a backup, like in Unreal, I guess you could have a layer for blockout that is retained. That way, if you replace something and it's completely crazy, or it's kind of confusing to the level designer, they can toggle your art off and toggle their blockout on. That way, they can go back and forth and see, okay, this is what I blocked out. This is what the art did. Because then they can go back and have a conversation. You and level design can have a conversation about how, like what they're trying to do, what their goals are. And you should already know the experience that the level designers are doing, right? That's really important. Because you can't just go over their stuff and just make art. So it's really important that you help reinforce what level design was trying to make as well, right? With their blockout. And this just keeps going. At this point, it's more about like, okay, once everything has been replaced with art, and LD is not going to the blockout, or level design is not going to the blockout as often or at all, you've reached the stage where essentially you can start to iterate on the overall experience of that mission. And in some cases, like the reason I would say you block out props and you start replacing in the scene is if it comes back that the blockout isn't working for whatever reason, level design will literally go back and go into a blockout iteration again, which for an artist who's not ready for that, this is like what is it, killing your darlings or whatever that phrase is. You have to be okay with the idea that stuff's just going to get wiped and they're going to rearrange things and change stuff, and stuff's going to move around all over the place. So you can see, like, we're not even to this base color phase yet, which could possibly happen. Like if this gets reset and they're in their blockout iteration again, you could maybe then go into base color for assets that you know are probably going to get made. And then maybe the lighting team comes in and they start moving forward along with the blockout. Blockout feels more solid, gets approved. Then you're propping the scene in the engine again with more refined props. So there's this very it's very back and forth, leading all the way up to the point where you have an environment that's lit, textured, and plays well, right? And this whole time, you have to remember that it's not only level art, but you've got, it's gonna give me a second here, level design, lighting artists, effects art, or artists, I should say, effects artists. Let me think what else we got here. Gameplay, iterating on whatever the enemies are in the map and all that stuff. And just what would you call it? Audio. Yes, audio. Audio's, dude. Audio usually comes in quite late. Usually I would say broad strokes, if you can get audio music in early, that's huge. But you can expect that music's going to change a lot, right? But yeah, audio, gameplay, effects, lighting, level design, level art. I am totally missing. But let's start asking some questions in chat if you guys have any. Just because there's tons of things you can talk about in here that I guarantee you I'm missing in here, right? Because it's not a very easy, because there's programmers doing a bunch of stuff in the background. Maybe things don't come online like the way you want to do your grass in your environments for your game. Maybe that doesn't come online until like 4 months before you lock the game. And for anyone who doesn't know, locking the game is like when you're only trying to do bug fixing. All right, let me dig through here and see. Yeah, audio has a lot to do at the end, usually because they're relying on manually placing audio entities in the levels. And you can get a lot of bugs if you're not building your scenes the way that audio needs them to be in some cases. Depending on how the game's audio works, you might have to go back and do some stuff. But a lot of the times, tech art, which I miss in here, I would say they should be at the very top, just because they make level art awesomeness possible. And of course, QC or QA. Another question is, maybe you can't really answer it, but for example, how many time of a work it represent? Is it more than 3 months or more than a year of work? Oh, DEF CON, I can answer that. So I was on the White House from the beginning to the end of the game. That's literally, I can't say the exact length of our production, but I was on it the entire game. At what stage is performance checked? I mean, so tech art is always watching, if that's the best way to say, Paul. So if a good tech art team will basically raise it in a sync, in a weekly sync that happens, and be like, hey, just heads up, these things are built crazy expensive, or we noticed this thing. If it's really bad, they'll email people and flag it, and it'll usually be looked at or addressed within the day's end. Have you counted receiving and applying critique? Because that can be a big chunk of time. I mean, that I don't even want to show in here, because I would say your stuff is being looked at and reviewed and commented on all the time, whether it's someone next to you or someone that's reviewing the content. Does a simple environment artist need to know every single stage of production? No, but I would say that you will. If you don't know it, you will. And that's really, I would say, the difference between an intern and a junior, and someone who's hang on, I'm seeing chat. Someone who is gone through or has gone through a lot of production projects, right? How are dependencies managed? Like task B needs task A completed first. Yeah, so dependencies are managed through things like Jira. So slow, Jeremy. What are you talking about, Chris? Always watching. I mean, good tech art is a great thing, and it'll make a game shine so much more. How important is it for a modern day 3D artists to know tech art stuff? They aren't specifically tech artists, of course. Uh, I mean, you're doing very technical things. If you can achieve a scene that looks quite good in Unreal, you're already starting to touch on some more technical aspects, especially once you start looking at blueprints. Um, and I mean, that's quite simple, right? Those are visual scripting versus actual scripting. But I would say it's not too important. But if you show some more technical understanding than the average 3D artist, that's just bonus for getting you past other people that are applying for a position, right? You can never forget about the scrub master that does all of the paperwork. Dude, you talking about leads, Dragon? uh, Chris. So Chris is talking a little bit more on the pains of and realities of production. Is when an art director changes their mind. Hopefully, during pre-production, they've laid out the visual goals of what they want to achieve, right? And if they always resort back to that, and anything that they didn't think about, they can adapt it back into their design for the visual direction. That's a really good art director. So Ben, at his first job, he was building a roadside, and its immediate terrain. There was a small lay-by in the ref, no more than a few meters to park your car or something. I completely messed up the scale and ended up creating a lay-by that was perhaps 100 meters big. A few weeks go by, and then I look at it again in game. LD has converted it into a whole start area for the game. Which department defines the footprint size of the environment? I would say it's a combination of multiple departments. It's tech art, level art, and level design, kind of mandating what is this game, what are we building, understanding the scope of it, and then really trying to understand how big does it need to be in order to achieve what we want to achieve. It also depends a lot on like what type of game you're building, right? Yeah, QA is always watching as well. Hated friends of the FX artists, yeah, because effects are always trying to layer it on. So Chris is also saying sometimes, yeah, if art direction isn't working for the game on a smaller level, it's about like how each asset should look and feel. On a higher level, it means like doing big sweeps of visual changes to make the game better in some way. Because down the line of production, you found issues that the art direction didn't think about. Feasibility is usually a big one, for example, especially for concept art directors versus game design directors, game design art directors. So art directors that are game centric. Who is principal artist and what is he doing? That's an interesting question. Yeah, Paul, that happens, man. Um, let's see, principal artist. So a principal artist can kind of take things and run them themselves, if that makes sense. So a principal artist, it's like if God decided to do some 3D, they know their stuff usually better than anyone. Yeah, principal artists usually are specialists as well. So like if you've got someone who's really good at making cliffs, right? Maybe that's a weird example. Cliffs or like maybe they're specializing in terrain or they're really good at destruction, right? They will build You'll be like, all right, so you're the one who is awesome at destruction. Can you work with art direction to build documentation as well as examples and key assets that show exactly how we want destruction to look and feel? And then you just hand that to them. You build all of their Jira tasks with them, right? And they just kind of they run it themselves. A lot of the times they just come back to you for feedback and just to make sure it's all kind of going in the right direction. But they're usually pretty self-managing, and you can almost guarantee that every single time what they're making is like amazing. Do principal weapons artists exist? Oh, I'm sure. Yes. Yeah, yeah. Oli? Yes. How risky is it when you like to touch different fields when you apply to a specific position? I like concerning, but at the same time, I like to understand, improve the knowledge, basic rigging and animation. What do you recommend for someone who's wanting to be more like a generalist? Um, Chris might Chris might be able to chime in on this as well, but essentially, if you want to be a generalist, I think that smaller studios are going to benefit you the most, or you're going to be more enticing to a smaller studio, right? More indie. Indie studios love generalists. Yes, Rookie's saying it right now. The bigger the studio, the more specialized they tend to want you to be. And you kind of heard it when I was saying like principal cliff artist or a principal terrain artist. It's very specific. Principal destruction artist that you'll literally rename. You'll like build the role around their specialty. Yeah, Quilly Willie, Ben Wilson. He was the road guy for Division One. But like when it comes to being a generalist, I would suggest looking at more like top tier. Shiro, how you doing? Good to see you. I would look at top tier indie studios or where the teams are small. And when I say small, I mean like 60 and down. Once you start to get into the 100 range, that's crazy big for wanting to be a generalist. Because if you're looking at 100 developers on a project, that means that there's code in there. You've got programmers doing code. You've got animators, technical animators, level designers, tech art, engine team. Chris Radsby. 90 directors, 10 grunts. Let's go. I think the only big studio I know that likes hiring generalists is Sony Santa Monica. Interesting. But even so, their roles still seem generalized. Joke's on you. So when you look at all this stuff that's happening here, right? I don't know how much this is legible in the sense of like making sense of it. I would like to build a better production planning skew so that you can really understand what goes into these roles and like how people join teams, what it means when they join, and onboarding and all that stuff. But between these, like this is more of the extreme, right? When you're in a really big studio and everyone's kind of specialized. There's another set. Oh, we've got 18 minutes roughly until Yin starts, by the way. If you go to a really small team, and I mean small, like 15 or smaller, I think you get any smaller than that, and you're looking at what is Valheim? How many people made that one? Is that 2 people? Small, 5. It's 5, really? Okay. Team of 3 for a while. Small, only 1. I mean, it's doable. It's doable, but you have to drastically reduce your scope and think purely on like interesting, fun mechanics, right? Fez was a project like that. Yeah, see, and it's when you start to shrink a team down, it's like, okay, are you an artist if you're doing level design, right? But you're also doing concept art. So this can get, when the team gets small enough, you start taking on more and more hats, right? And hats are like skill sets. Like maybe you've got an artist that does props and lighting. Maybe this artist does effects and lighting. And maybe all of them. Oh, did you know what I forgot down here? Prop art, which is a huge team usually. But maybe all of these artists are doing everything, right? And they're just trying to split it up to make it work. But yeah, I'm trying to illustrate how propping a scene. It's like when you get to this size, it's like code related stuff. Maybe this artist is really good at the code side. Maybe they're one of the only ones that's good at code side. So maybe they're the ones doing all of the code. So maybe they can't do concept, or maybe they can't do level design. So maybe this artist will take it on. So at this point, this is clearly like, I would say general developer, right? What's your approach to prioritizing assets? Which assets to be done first? Big to small, bold. Big to small. We talked a little bit about it, but it's like, it's concept, blocking out large scale parts of the scene, and then like modulars, or where large buildings are going to be, or larger props, and then you go down from there. But if you're trying to tell a story on a scene, I would say take that narrative for your scene. This is for a personal scene, by the way. Take that narrative of a scene and look at what props are needed. Like, what is the priority of your scene? Don't look at the priority of the assets, the priority of the scene. So if the scene's priority is the story you're trying to tell, then the assets should be prioritized based on how important they are to the narrative of the scene. Assets. What is happening there? But yeah, assets artist. Terrible. Did I miss any questions in chat? Let's see here. What parts of the pipeline can I skip as a lone dev? But still ship a. What parts of the pipeline can I skip as a lone dev? I mean, you can skip the texturing phase. You could go with just base colors. And don't tell me you haven't seen a game that's done that. Look at the size of the teams. It's a really interesting exercise to look at games and the team sizes and see what they pull off. Because if you've noticed over time, they've become more visually like higher in fidelity with smaller teams, which has a whole lot to do with like how you can automate a lot of stuff now, and how you can texture things quicker. Porps. Did I write porps somewhere? Now I'm looking. No. Maybe it's somewhere. But yeah, I would say, just like Chris is saying, bold, big to small, screen real estate. Viral. I got scared. Do environment artists work with character artists much? That's a really good question, Paul. So a lot of the times by proxy, I will say an environment artist or a props artist will work with character art, and that's through animation. So this is where metrics get really important. And Ben was talking about metrics on Monday, right? But what I'm talking about is metrics of props. So if you're going to be doing a lot of mocap in a scene, that's when it's like, okay, if we've got a lot of mocap for characters, then we need to understand the standardized height of chairs. How about the height of tables? Because the height of tables, the height of a chair, the height of a keyboard, those all are very, very dependent on how that person mocaps. So if you're going to be doing a mocap session where a person is going to go walk and sit on a chair and then turn and then start typing on a keyboard, the height of that chair, if it's different anywhere else and they animate all of the mocap to the height of that chair, you'll break the whole, like characters will be clipping through the seats or they'll be floating. And you have to think like, okay, if I need to unify all those, that's something to document, right? That's where all this documentation that's in here. Very important. And it's not really talked about too much. But just to give you an idea, when a mocap session happens, those metrics are locked into a page, right? A documentation page on metrics. That metrics page is taken with the animation team or the mocap team. And then they're like, okay, this table is supposed to be this tall. Then they build it. They'll find a table and then they'll add things to the legs to get it to that height. And then that's the table. They'll do the same thing with the chairs. Where's the door handle? All that stuff needs to be solved. That way they can build the set, do all the mocap, get those recordings, and then remove the set. And if those are wrong or they have to go back, that's like you're costing money so quickly. Yeah, you have to be quite accurate. Anyways, we've got 9 minutes and 58 seconds. We're gonna switch over here in a second. Are you guys how are you guys doing? Do prop artists, environment artists also have to model animals or organic stuff, which requires good anatomy knowledge? That depends on the team size. Team size will control that. Organic stuff, if the team's really big and people are specialized, maybe you'll have a creature team, or maybe you outsource to a wildlife team that just makes wildlife art. Or will the character art usually will take care of that if the team is really small. If the team gets really small, everyone's like is pushing, you know what I mean? Would it be hard for an environment artist in VFX to transition to games? That's a great question. A lot of the times the VFX portfolios don't show what you need to know in order to be the role you've applied for. And it's really difficult. Like the transitions, basically you need to show that you can make game art because it is very different from VFX. Is a statue of a creature given to the character art? Yes. Unless props team. It depends on the importance, Cass. I think that's the key word. It depends on the importance. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it here.